How organized are you? More importantly, how organized are you when it comes to your digital life? It's one thing to clean up your home or office. It's a totally different and wild beast to organize whatever you have stored in the cloud. This is the 5 a.m. Miracle, episode number 536. Organized for Good, Optimizing Your Digital World with Shawn Lemon. Good morning, and welcome to the 5 a.m. Miracle. I am Jeff Sanders, and this is the podcast dedicated to dominating your day before breakfast. My goal is to help you bounce out of bed with enthusiasm, create powerful, lifelong habits, and tackle your grandest goals with extraordinary energy. In the episode this week, I speak with Shawn Lemon, otherwise known as the Digital Organizer. After 7 years working at Apple, teaching people how to use their technology, Shawn realized that for most people out there, getting digitally organized was much harder than they thought. He saw that his clients needed to understand what's important and where to find it. So in our conversation, Shawn and I discuss how to address enormous messes you may have in your digital platforms, why starting with a blank slate may be your best option, and which productivity tools today are the best for getting and staying organized for good. Let's get to it. And I'm back here in the 5 a.m. Miracle Studios with my guest, Shawn Lemon. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to hang with you today.
Yeah, this should be a fun conversation, mostly because I have personally been in a new kind of reorganization of my own systems recently, and I think you're the perfect guy to talk to about the digital world, getting organized, getting things done. And so I want to start with that, with your personal story around productivity, and really, when did you discover or realize the power of just being organized, especially in the digital world?
Yeah, so I worked at the Apple Store for 7 years, and I taught people how to use their Apple products. And so they would buy something new, have all of their data transferred onto this new computer, and then sign up for lessons to learn how to use it. And they'd show up in a stool next to me and say, okay, what do I do with this? And feel totally overwhelmed by the mess that was on there and trying to learn how to use something while being in the midst of a giant mess is really difficult for a lot of people. And so we had some pre-work to do. And sometimes we still really wouldn't be able to make all that much progress in an hour session at the Apple Store when they're not going to see me next time. This is a bigger problem. And I ended up starting to do it on the side, and it developed into a business where I was helping people get organized and teach them how to stay organized going forward.
Yeah, I know that experience. I actually worked at the Apple Store myself years ago. I was selling the computers, not doing the tech work there. But I love, that Apple environment is a very specific one, but I think it's a really good example because there's people that walk into that store all the time who they don't have a system. They don't know how to use the computer well. And computers by themselves are extraordinarily complex, right? There's a lot of potential, and the cloud, and using the internet is infinite. So we have so much potential to get ourselves just, overwhelmed with everything. I know I'm in that space every day. And so I guess from that perspective, let's take like the bigger picture angle here. If someone's approaching a computer or they're approaching the cloud systems, like how do we kind of conceptualize what being organized looks like in the digital world?
Well, I think the thing that you have to realize is it's all about what you're trying to do, not the potential of the product that you've got. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, and they experience a massive amount of shame of not knowing how everything works, and they're not taking full advantage of everything that this technology can do. It's not about what the technology can do, because it's, like you said, infinite. There's so many different things that you can learn and spend time in. So what's important to you? What are you trying to get done and use this machine for? And let's try and set things up for that. Are you communicating? Are you creating? And are you browsing and using it for entertainment? Well, let's focus on those three things.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take because I know that, let's go back to the Apple Store example. When I would talk to somebody there about, buying a computer, that was always the first question. Like, what are you going to do with this device? Like, what's your goal here? Are you just going to, browse the internet and use Microsoft Word, or are you going to be making a movie on this device? Like, there's so many different things and angles to take. I think that I know for myself, like I love to have files and folders organized to the nth degree. And I have a very specific system for that. But it wasn't natural for me. I had to build this over many decades now to refine that system. But I only did so because I saw the desperate need because I myself was drowning in my own stuff. And so how does someone who is there, like you're drowning in noise, what do you do to begin that process to kind of untangle the mess?
Oh yeah, that's awesome. So what we want to do is kind of detach from the current mess. And let's think blank slate. What I typically like to do when going through this process is go up and just create a brand new folder and open that folder up and imagine that as just my blank slate that I'm working with. And I start looking through the mess and deciding what I have, or looking at what I have and deciding what I want to group together and what's relevant now. Because we've all got tons of stuff that we want to save, things that we need to get rid of. But in the end, there's only a few things that are really relevant to us where we're at right now. We only have a certain number of vehicles or pieces of property or other assets or in projects that we can be working on at one time. Those are the things that we need to prioritize. So I try and think of okay, what are my main categories? I've got finance. I have health and fitness. I've got, properties. I'm actually looking at my list now. I've got personal writings. I've got travel. And so I start creating some of these folders and start moving things in there. And so I call the process cannibalizing the old system. So I'm eating the old system. I'm grabbing stuff from the old to create something new. And then what I'm left with is the mess of things that are really overwhelming to us, and we can archive that. We can go and we can decide what we want to delete or group together and basically create some sort of a deep archive where we can still find it. But really what we're doing is prioritizing today and where we're going in the future so that we can get out of that feeling of overwhelm and anxiety and focus on the future. Because usually when people are doing a reorganization process, they're typically feeling overwhelmed and things aren't fitting right. And so to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to reorganize all of the old stuff and purge sometimes is actually counterproductive. So I always like to focus on the today and the future first, and then we can always go back and purge and organize more of the archive later on if we've got the mental space.
What's interesting to me about the archive concept is that when I think about my house as a good example, most people have a room in their house that's unorganized. That's just like a dumping ground for stuff. My garage is that space in my house where just everything just winds up there. And
totally,
so
that's my shed.
Right, everyone has that room somewhere, or a drawer, or whatever the case is, and so in the physical sense, my house is a finite space, and so if the garage is full, at some point it overflows. I can't put more stuff in. But in the sake of the internet, and I know this is there's an emotional attachment we have to our things, right? Even the digital stuff. And so if I want to archive something in the digital sense, it can still be there and it be accessible, but just not in front of my face all the time. I feel like that's what I'm trying to get to is, can I put it somewhere where I can access it, but not feel like I've emotionally lost what I had?
Mm-hmm. Totally. And so archiving and deleting and going through that process, I like to do archiving and deleting in one sitting. I don't want to try and organize and then also decide what I'm archiving and deleting at the same time. So to me, those are actually two different processes, because when we're trying to purge the old stuff, that's an emotional process. And it's totally different than a creative process of thinking of what's my workflow. Here, we're having to analyze and let go and release. Those are two different brain patterns going on there that we need to activate. And so we're not going to have good success in either one while we're splitting our attention. So if I can sit down and look through what I've got and really be brutally honest, am I ever going to look at this again? Do I really need this? Thinking about maybe source material for a video that we've created for a slideshow. Okay, well, I want to keep everything because maybe I'll go back and redo it later on down the road or pull some clips from it. Are you really? If you are that person who would, sure, keep it. If you're not that person, or if you find that, okay, 10 years have gone past and I still haven't re-edited that skydiving video, maybe it's time to trash everything except the finalized version. And we can go in and honor the things that we've gone through, whether they were good or bad, and be able to really just release that and then decide for the things that we might access again, we can go ahead and archive that. And I still go back and purge things from the archive and be like, okay, I haven't looked at it in a really long time. Let's go ahead and delete this stuff. So sometimes that's hard for me to release as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of the time frame there, because I've heard before that, like with physical stuff, if I haven't used this item in the last 3 years, let's say, then I can probably get rid of it and it's fine. But the digital world, I feel like it moves a lot faster. And so I could keep things forever, and I have this tendency to want to do so. But I also have, let's use my podcast as an example. For a long time, I kept all the production files for the show. And so I had all the original recordings, all the raw takes. But I got to a point a few years into the show where I was like, I never am going to go back and look at this. It has no value to me. I'm not going to republish the show or re-edit these episodes. I have too many at this point to do that anyway. And so it just becomes this like burdensome like pile of stuff. Even if it's digital, I'm paying for the storage space. That's part of it too. And like, do I want to keep this? And I get to a point often where the answer is just, I want, like emotionally want to release as much as I can. And then I feel a lot better when I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the same way. And the tech industry wants us to keep things. They want us to hoard because the more stuff we hoard, the more storage we have to pay for. And the more stuff we have on their system, the more sticky it is. And it's hard to release it. And it's hard to get, everything from your Dropbox, your OneDrive, your multiple Google Drives. Stuff is spread out all over the place. And so then it's hard to leave their system again. And it's just because we can keep it, just because space is cheap, does not mean we should. And we would never tolerate this amount of mess in our physical space. If so, you're called a hoarder, and we have some work to do about releasing things. But we should, yeah. That actually makes me think of this little exercise that I often try and get people to go through, which is think of your digital space and imagine you wave a wand and it transforms from a digital space to a physical one. What does that look like? And almost everyone, their face just looks horrified. Just like, yeah, it's pretty bad. We're staring at these screens how many hours a day? 8 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours a day, depending on like how much you're checking out on these as well. This is the space that we live in. This is the mental space that we live in. Like we need to kind of clear it out.
I mean, from that perspective, I took a strategy years ago where my digital desktop on my computer, I treat the same as my physical desktop, in which I want to have like the inbox zero concept. So once I'm done with a file, I put it away. I delete it or I store it for later. But my digital desktop, my computer, both my computers are completely empty unless I'm using a file. I know that tends to be a more rare perspective because I've seen a lot of desktops digitally that are just a pile of junk. I mean, this just, to your point about if that was a physical space, I would be exhausted by how much nonsense is there. And how do we get to a point where we can acknowledge that, like, we're causing our own problems here and there are solutions available?
Yeah. And some of that's just slowing down and coming up with a good system. Most people who have a really messy desktop like that, that's not the way they really want it to be. And they've tried creating systems before, but it hasn't worked for them. And then they couldn't find what they were looking for. And so then things just pile up on the desktop again because they can look for it. And then really what they're doing is organizing geographically. And so they know where the space is. So they're trying to actually create a physical space on their desktop to be able to find things, because looking at stuff in a list doesn't quite compute like it might for you, or at least you've exercised that muscle enough to be able to find them. And so this actually brings up a good topic of ADHD and how many people come to find productivity experts to help them with this sort of thing, because that's them. It's hard to focus, and it's hard to even think about doing the end of the day routine of cleaning up. Like I listened to your episode on that of talking about zeroing everything out, whether it's inbox or the desktop. That process of stopping and cleaning up and clearing things out is really difficult for many, many people out there, especially high achievers, because they're always off to the next thing. It's agonizing to clean up. And so what we need to do is or what you need to do, listener, as an ADHD person or someone who is having a hard time with working in a digital space, is we need to think about this as a sprint. And I'm going to give you a guide. So you can go to thedigitalorganizer.com/5am, and I'll give you an organization guide that'll kind of take you through the process of organizing. And so you want to create a good framework, get all of that stuff in there, and we have to change some critical preferences, like your browser. Instead of just downloading to your downloads folder, we want to have it ask us where our files need to be downloaded. That way, once we have the right framework and we have a space to put that file, we can name it and save it in the right spot in the first place, so we don't have to clean up later. It is all about creating the path of least resistance that is an organized way, rather than the path of least resistance being your desktop.
I think it's interesting from that perspective. The downloads folder is a good example of one, because I have a program on my computer that basically allows me to take whatever's in the downloads folder and automatically will transfer it to my desktop. And so if anything does land in the downloads folder, it doesn't stay there for more than like 2 seconds, and it moves. So I'm forced to address it because it lands on the desktop, and I know that I'm going to organize that space. Anything that lands there, I will absolutely take care of. In the same way that I do inbox zero with my email, like I'm going to process this stuff every 24 hours at the very latest. And the whole idea of cleanup is funny too, because I've got 2 young girls at home, and we teach them all the time, like we're going to play with the toys and then clean them up. And so before we go to bed, we're going to do a cleanup, and then tomorrow we can just make a mess again. But it's the same thing as adults, like with businesses and lives. Like we don't take the time usually to be that intentional with the cleanup, but that's there's so much value there. Like I see so much potential for organization just from that one strategy. It's really powerful.
It really is. And it's what I think what you're talking about is tidying up.
Yeah.
And I think people can do that, but it's like when they're in the mess, and look at that person's desktop, and it's got, hundreds of files on it, and their mail icon says, 10,000 plus, and, stuff like that. That's so far out of control. This isn't tidying up anymore.
Right.
We need an architect to come in and kind of reimagine how this needs to go, and kind of plow it down and rebuild and teach you in the meantime. And, once you've got that system set up, and what we do is we like to take people through a process we're going to take you through step by step of cleaning up. So it's not intimidating. You know what to do, and we're going to make the decisions together so that we can actually get you to the finish line. And once you do it that way, and you actually have a really good system and you learn how it works, then you can tidy up. And this is the difference between like when somebody like takes all their stuff, they try and create a bunch of folders and they try and get organized, but then they can't stick with it. They've made it too complex. They've tried purging and creating at the same time, and they haven't really been given a framework of how do I organize and how do I think about putting these files together in a way that really makes sense for how I work. So it's nice theoretically, but in practice, it doesn't flow well. And so that's what we're really trying to help people figure out is, all right, let's take the approach of how are you going to find this? What are the things that you do often together in one sitting? And let's think about organizing that way.
Yeah, let's take someone as an example who may have like a really messy Google Drive or Dropbox system. And if I think this from the perspective of if I'm going to move my house from one house to another, when I go to the new home is empty, and then I fill it with my stuff, like one piece of furniture at a time. Would you take someone digitally in that same way of saying like, here's a new, like brand new Google Drive account, and we're going to move your stuff over almost like one folder at a time, one document at a time? Like, is there a need for that kind of methodical, like rebuilding almost? Or is it more of taking what's there and just kind of reorganizing your space?
It works best when we're creating a new environment and we move stuff into the new spot. And that it doesn't mean that we have to create a whole new account. That's usually the wrong idea, is creating a new account. What we need to do is take the mess, put it into a folder called mess to sort or something, and then we create a new folder structure that makes sense for like how we're thinking about our lives now, and what we've got of what's relevant. And then we move stuff into that new file structure and we empty out that old mess folder. And we've got to grab from multiple Google Drives and Dropbox and OneDrive, and we've got to grab everything from the other sources and move them into the new one. That way we empty out Dropbox, we empty out OneDrive and the other Google Drives. So if you accidentally end up there or want to go there, you see that it's empty and you're not tempted to store things there again because you don't want that mess there again. So yeah, we definitely want to create new.
I mean, from that perspective, do you recommend people take like one specific, cloud system like Google Drive or Dropbox? You just pick one and then not use the others. Is that the approach?
Yeah. So think of it like this. We've got a filing cabinet inside of our house. And that when we get stuff in the mail or someone gives us important documents or we leave the hospital with a birth certificate or whatever it is, we need to take that and store it somewhere. We want one source of truth for your filing system. That doesn't mean that we don't have OneDrive or Dropbox or a cloud app or whatever other accounts exist. It means that we can interact with people through those like a mailbox. I'm going to take this, like my taxes are in my Google Drive. But when I need to submit that paperwork to my accountants, well, they use some system called ShareFile. Well, I copy the files that are in my Google Drive and I give them copies of it. And I put that in ShareFile like I do my mailbox. And so when they deliver something to me, they put it in ShareFile and I download it and I put it in my Google Drive because that's where I live. I'm not going to have a whole bunch of different organizational systems in Dropbox and all the different Google Drives. And that's the most common mistake that people make is trying to organize in 30 different locations.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was there before. I think over time, I've really consolidated in a lot of ways. And it really is incredible how much more clarifying that process is. We can see everything in one place. I feel like when that happens, that's when you see the problem spots so quickly and can solve them a lot faster. But if they're too spread out, it's almost like it's just there's too many places to look and you just almost give up the process.
Totally. And for people who have attention issues, then when they go to all of these different spots, they get exposed to other files and to other problems, and other ideas and whatever. And so then they lose focus and then productivity goes out the window and then you're trying to get back on track again.
So let's shift a little bit more towards like the business side of organization. Do businesses have similar problems? I assume they do. I mean, I run a business. I know my personal business are very overlapped. As a solopreneur, that's what I do. But does a typical business have the same like structural challenges that an individual would have?
Without a doubt. And honestly, it's usually worse because if you think about it, a business is comprised of what? People.
Yeah.
And every person who's involved in that company has their own way of organizing, their own way of naming things or not naming them at all, or bad habits of saving to their desktop instead of in the shared Google Drive folder that everyone else is supposed to use. And they bring their Evernote and someone wants to use OneDrive. And especially for the smaller businesses who have bootstrapped up and they've just been building over the years, they've got a ton of tools and it's all spread out. So it's a major issue, and most businesses, especially the people running it, don't usually realize how much of a negative impact it has on the team when things are so spread out. It's chaos, and then most people feel shame around it, and they feel embarrassed that they're not better at it, and so nobody says anything. So you can say, "Oh, I'm a digital organizer," and people are like, "Oh my gosh, I need you," but no, very few people take action because they're so ashamed about it. But the thing is, it is ubiquitous. I mean, across the board, almost every business is struggling with this. It's pretty rough out there.
I was giving a talk a few months ago to a company who I was asking them about their systems, and one thing that they brought up that I think is more common now than it has been, which is they're not all using the same tools. Like individually, if they work, especially remote workers, a lot of times they have access to their own tools, their own decisions on, I like this task manager and this calendar, and their coworker has a whole different system, and then they're trying to share with wildly different tools. And like it becomes this, it's even way more difficult then because all of a sudden you can't communicate and collaborate and work together. Like, what do companies do or teams do when you've got this, like a lack of a shared cohesive system?
Yeah. So the first step is recognizing I have a problem. But it's taking inventory of what are the tools that we use? What do we like using? What are our customers like? If we're delivering or collaborating with other people, what are our peers and what are our clients use? And that's usually that process that I like to take people through to understand which tool they should be using in the first place. And then we need to consolidate everything there. And that usually means a data migration, which can be tricky depending on the situation. So sometimes you want to look for help for that. But yeah, you pull everything together and in one location and you train. And so we love Google Workspace or the Microsoft Suite just because it's got great email contacts, calendars, files, and everything. And from there, you can really create a system from all those other tools.
Yeah, I was going to ask about tools specifically in terms of like, do you have your go-to systems that tend to work best for most people if they want to, make a switch today and get organized? Like, are there some of the best players out there?
So Google is our favorite. That's the majority of the time we're migrating people into Google because the younger generation, they grew up on this. Their school used it. Everybody's got a Google account. They're familiar with Google Drive. And while they may not like certain aspects about Google Drive, that's a quick training thing of how sharing works and understanding which folders. You clear that up, and then Google Drive is amazing. And the collaboration, live collaboration is so good. We love pulling in Google Drive. That's our favorite primary core system is Google Workspace. And then we like 1Password for passwords and Asana or ClickUp for project management.
Excellent. Yeah, those are great tools there. I've used basically all of those in the past. My other question that I definitely want to ask you about is email, because I feel like there's an overlap here, but email is almost a whole separate beast to organize. I know that the way that I've approached it for years is unique in the sense that I'm definitely committed to inbox zero, even though most people are not. And I don't have a crazy folder system like I used to have. I basically process something, I drop it into a folder that I call complete, and then I ignore it forever. And it's basically this process of I take care of it, I put it away, I move on. And like, is there a best approach in the digital sense of we have all these messages coming in where we want to process what matters, but not be, distracted by all the other noise that exists there?
Yeah, I'm with you. Less is better. I used to have an intricate folder structure. That's really hard to keep up with. And everyone listening, you can let go of your complex folder systems, especially if you're using Gmail or Outlook. The search function is great. And if the
Mm.
search isn't working well for you, it might be your app. If you're using Apple Mail, the search function doesn't work all that well. I use Spark. It's pretty decent. But if I have a hard time finding message, I go to gmail.com. And who does search better than Google? Nobody. So I used to have a done folder as well, and I would move stuff once it was finished. I moved it into that folder, and I realized, why am I moving that? All I have to do is archive. There's now archive buttons in all of the major email
Mm.
platforms. Why even move it in the first place? So the only reason I create a folder is if I need to browse through a series of emails because I don't know what I'm looking for and I don't remember who it was. So if we take a good example of who needs a more complex file structure, a perfect example are real estate agents. They are dealing with buyers and sellers, and they're dealing with a lot of people as a part of that transaction that they may not remember who it was or when or the chain of events. And like there's a lot of liability there as far as like being a broker or a real estate agent. And so we need to be able to keep all of that communication and pull it all together. And so there's some good strategies around organizing that and then archiving those folders from view so you don't see all of your transactions, so you don't have a huge folder list. And I can go into more detail if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, less is better. I use SaneBox as well to help filter some emails for me automatically, and those are the folders that I use. It's SaneBox filters emails and puts them in those folders for me, and that's it.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've come to realize over the years with both kind of the digital cloud space and email, all of this is just the intentionality piece of saying, here's my mess, and I'm gonna go build a system to fix it, regardless of what that system is. I've changed over the years and I've evolved a ton, but the one thing that's always true is that like I'm super committed to simplicity and figuring it out, whereas I know other people just they aren't. And I think the difference is pretty staggering with those who work on it and those who do not. And how does someone decide, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to like make that switch and just tackle this problem.
I think the first thing is realizing that this isn't something that you fix once and then it's
Mm,
done. Like this
yeah.
is a process, just like life throws us things, different circumstances and whatever. Uh, just because you organize it once doesn't mean it's done for forever. And we have to realize that this is an ongoing thing and it's just part of life.
Yeah.
And coming to terms with that I'm going to have to organize this every once in a while, and it's not fixed. Then that kind of helps to change the mindset around it a little bit of like, okay, it's time for me to do some cleanup, and we may need to schedule some time with a VA or with a friend to say, hey, I need to do some cleanup, and I don't like doing this. Can we kind of have a coffee date together and sit down for an afternoon and just do some clearing out and we can kind of brainstorm together? Or of course you could hire somebody to help you out with this sort of thing. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it is just realizing that switch. And then from there, it's don't stop.
Yeah.
Don't stop and just give up on it. You can do this. You just haven't quite figured it out yet. And there are some videos out there and there's some quick consults that you can get to help you figure out this little piece that you've been missing. And then it really can become a whole lot easier. And maybe it's just someone giving you permission to archive some stuff and let some things go, or go in and purge and delete things that you really won't ever find again, and just be given permission to do that and to be organized and get stuff put away.
Yeah. I love that. Was there anything else I didn't ask you that you wanted to make sure to mention to our listeners today?
There are so many people out there who are really struggling with this. And just because Jeff and I are pretty good at keeping our stuff organized and processing and really dedicated to this doesn't mean you can't have this. There is help. You can get our guide to kind of take you through it. You can book a discovery call with me, and I can give you a plan that you can take and run with it, or you can get some help from us. Either way, but there are so many coworkers and other people that maybe your boss or your direct reports who are struggling with this just as much as you are. And if we start talking about it and talking about the issues and taking it one step at a time of let's purge today, tomorrow, let's think about how to reorganize our stuff. You really can get on top of this. You just maybe can't do it all at once and in one sitting. So we kind of need to take a bite-sized approach. In my guide, that if you go to that link that's in the show notes, it'll take you through that process by process, and you can spend one day a week doing each part of the process, and you can get to the other side of this.
Yeah, I love that. I think the longer term approach there is definitely good, and bite-sized chunks. That's a huge help. I love that. So Shawn, thanks a lot for being on the show. This is definitely a topic that I'm pretty obsessed with. I love being organized and getting things more simplistic. So yeah, I'll be sure to have that link for our listeners on the show notes so they can definitely check out more of your work. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And for the action step this week, organize your digital world. You know, the cloud offers unlimited potential, which also leads to an unlimited amount of space that desperately needs a well-thought-out system. Shawn Lemon is an expert in digital organization and can absolutely help you or your business to create an organized and sustainable digital platform. You can learn more at thedigitalorganizer.com/5am. Of course, subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app, or become a VIP member of the 5am Miracle community by getting the premium ad-free version with exclusive bonus episodes at 5ammiraclepremium.com. That's all I've got for you here on the 5am Miracle podcast this week. Until next time, you have the power to change your life, and the fun begins bright and early.